All right, welcome everybody. It's 4 o'clock, so I want to get this started promptly, so not as to take up your time. And I hope we can get this done by 5. But if people end up having questions and we want to go longer, that's fine too. I am recording this, so it will be available online later. And that's also important to know because the slides that we're going to watch this afternoon will also be posted online. And those slides have some links that you might want to access. So it'll take a couple of days for those to get up online. But I will email everybody when they arrive, and you'll be able to access those slides and get through the slides to the links that we'll be using. And you may find that helpful. So let me introduce myself. I know some of you already, but those of you who have not yet met, I am Bill McDonald. I am the Director of Academic Success. I have been here almost a year and a half, and I helped introduce our 1L students to what it takes to do well in law school, and I work with our 3L students as they are preparing for the bar exam. And I'm happy to be working with you today. I know that you are all here, not necessarily because you chose to be in this position, but I am pleased to see that you're being proactive about trying to take the next steps and go forward. And I really want to help you to do well in the February bar exam. We'll talk a little bit shortly about how to plan out for that and about actually whether to decide if February is going to be the best time for you or not. But before we begin, let me just take a second to explain, the shape of what this is going to be. First of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about what you have done and you should be able to learn from the bar exam that you have taken, and then talk about how to plan for the February bar exam. And again, it may turn out that February may not be the one for you to take. I'm hoping it is. I'd like to see you guys move forward as quickly as possible. But I really want you to think about your time and your resources and how this can work so that you have the best chance for success going forward. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about both how to plan out your time between now and the bar exam and what kind of resources that you might need and where to find these resources. And we have some of those resources here, and I want you to think of me and the school as a resource in the sense that I am here especially to work with people to give them feedback about what they have done, give them some suggestions about how they can improve, and really I don't want you to feel like you're in this vacuum where you're by yourself and you're trying to accomplish this task. I know sometimes it can feel a little overwhelming, but really we're here to support you. I am particularly here to support you, but I do know the dean and the rest of the administration is behind you as well. And so I want to make sure that you know what resources there are and know to reach out to us when you need help. And then finally, at the end of this, what I'd like to do is basically open up the floor for questions. I see we have about 8 people with us online and here live. So when I open up the floor to questions, I may unmute the microphones so that I can hear you, or I can take questions by writing. You can type into the group chat and I can answer questions that appear there. I am, however, going to mute your microphones for the time being while I deliver this portion, just so that we don't have the noises coming through for the recording. So before I begin, having given this general overview of what we're going to talk about, before I begin, if anybody has any particular questions, now would be a time to go ahead and type that into the group chat. Otherwise, if I don't see anything come up, I'm going to start off. And I'm going to start, as I said, with some slides. I think the slides will be helpful because they present a kind of ordered way to think about what to do over the coming 4 months. And also, as I said, some useful links so you have access to some information. And hopefully that will be provide you with resources that you can use, because I think especially having gone through one iteration of the bar at least, it can be kind of daunting to find new materials that you can use, and I want to make sure we provide you with places to look for that. So I've stalled a little bit for time to see if any questions would come up. I don't see any questions yet. So since I don't see any questions, I'm going to go ahead and go into the slide presentation. You won't have to look at me while I do this. We're going to have to pull that up and start it from the beginning. And that's what we're sharing now.
the volume of the
Okay, great. So I believe you should all be able to still hear me. You won't see me, but let's just go talk a little bit about what you can be doing to prepare for the bar exam. And obviously, one of the advantages you have, although it may not feel like an advantage, is you have at least gone through a bar examination now already. So you know what the bar is like, and you know, or you can figure out some of the areas in which you didn't perform as well as you might have liked to, and we can work on those particular areas to improve, okay? So the first thing that you want to do then is to think about what can you learn from the July bar exam that you just took. And everybody has received, and some people have forwarded on to me, their score reports from the New York State Bar Board of Bar Examiners. And that score report actually has a lot of useful information. But I find that sometimes people don't know the context into which to fit that information. So let me provide you a little bit of context. So if you've got your score reports, you can take a look at them. Or as I said, this will be available later, so you can check this out later. First of all, the first set of information you see in your score reports is your individual scores on the first 6 essays of the MEE, okay? Now, these essays have been posted by the National Conference of Bar Examiners, and that's that link that I provided there. If you go to that link, scroll down the page to MEE Study Aids and click on Sample Questions, that will take you to the actual questions that were provided in the July bar exam. At the moment, they are just posting the questions with no answers. Those questions and answers are going to be posted later by the New York Board of Bar Examiners. They will post the questions and their sample answers. That will not be for several weeks. So if you are impatient and you would like to look at your sample answers, you can order a packet of the questions with the sample answers as provided by the National Conference of Bar Examiners. There is a fee, I think it's $45. You can find that on the Conference of Bar Examiners website. I don't know if that's something I would spend that money on right now, since the answers will be appearing on the New York website eventually. And in fact, the answers that appear on the New York website are New York sample answers. So you can get a better feel for what the folks in New York thought was a good representative answer if you look at those sample answers than if you look at the more general sample answers that are going to be provided by the National Conference of Bar Examiners. So I would put that on my agenda for later this season to keep an eye out for it. Certainly, if once I know that these are available, I will alert everybody to them so you can take a look and compare those answers to your own answers if you have ordered your own answers. I have already suggested in my prior email that people should, in fact, make the investment, I believe it's $40, to ask the New York Conference of Bar Examiners to send you your copies of your essay the essay responses that you provided in this bar exam. I think it's an excellent idea, very helpful for preparing for your next bar exam. It's, of course, the subject matter issue is helpful. You can look at what you did or didn't write, and that will help you to sort of understand what you might want to refresh yourself on. But these are usually more important because they can help to analyze how you have been approaching your bar question, and it's under that actual time pressure of a real bar exam. And so looking at those questions, and this is something where I'd like to emphasize, I'm always open to reading your answers if you order them, and providing my advice about how you might approach the exam, maybe tweak your approach to improve your performance. This is something that I have done with people in the past, and they have said it is very helpful, because working with your actual work under the actual conditions is really just the best way for us to see but as I said, I'm offering to look at them as well. Now, what you can do at this point, though, is you have your score reports, and they tell you how many points you received on each of those 6 essays. And if you go to the sample questions that is listed at the National Conference of Bar Examiners, you will be able to see what the subjects in each of those essays were. So essay 1 was common law, 2 contracts, real property 3, trusts and future estates 4, evidence was 5, and corporations and LLCs was question number 6. You may have remembered this from the actual exam, but it was a while ago. But at least now you can look at your score report and get a sense of which subjects you were stronger in or weaker in. And that's an important data point for future study plans. You can also take a look at your scores from the MPT. Of course, the MPT is not subject bound, so here it's just a raw score based on your writing. But the thing that you should think about is for both the MEE and the MPT. Now remember, the MEEs as a whole, those 6 essays are 30% of your score, and the MPTs are 20% of your score. So between the 2 of them, they form 50% of your score. And since the cutoff in New York, the passing score you need to achieve is 266, then we can say on average, and it is just on average, but on average you want to try to get a 133 in your essays and a 133 in your multiple choice questions. If you do that, you reach the 266, and there you pass. And of course, we want to get beyond those scores. It's always better to have a little bit of cushion in case you run into a question that you're not prepared for, or you're just having an off day. But to get to that minimum, you should know that for both the MEEs and the MPTs, you want to be aiming for that average of 48 points in each of the answers, okay? So the way that the test is scaled, if you were to get straight 48 points on all of your essays and both of your MPTs, then you would get a 133, okay? And so that helps you to judge how well you're doing. You've got these raw numbers in front of you if you are looking at your score report. But that helps you to figure, okay, in terms of my knowledge and the sort of approach I took on these questions, you know, am I in the ballpark? Am I particularly weak in some areas or strong in other areas? And it's not a terrible problem if you've got some irregularity. Some areas are stronger than others, as long as you're getting yourself to that average of 48. But if you see, for example, that you've got a bunch of scores in the 40s, maybe even low 50s, but you've got 1 or 2 scores that are in the 30s, then that's really what's pulling you down from that 48 score, and particularly focusing on that subject matter is probably going to be an efficient way to bring yourself closer to that cutoff score that you're looking for. And again, I want to emphasize, this is just the minimum, and really you'd like to try to get your average more like 50 or even 52 to feel really comfortable that you're going to be way above that 133 range. But again, people have asked me, you know, they're looking at these scores and, okay, what score should I be at? And really it's that average score, 48. That's a measurement that you can use to help you figure out, okay, where should I be aiming to put my efforts in terms of what subject matter to study? So after looking at your essay scores, the next part of the score set sheet is your subject matter breakdown in the MBEs. So the 7 different subject matters that are listed in the MBE, they're broken down, they're described as percent below nationally, which is a little bit confusing, and it certainly confused me the first time I saw it. But the way to think about it is it's analogous to percentile. So when you took an LSAT, for example, if you scored in the 65th percentile, that meant you knew you had done better than 65% of the rest of the country. And so here, what they're saying when they say the percent below nationally, it means that across all of the people taking the MBE, because of course everybody in the country is taking the same MBE at the same time, across all of those people, your score was better than whatever the percentage is there. So if it says 10%, that means 90% of the country scored better than you. You scored better than 10%. If it says 50%, that means you're right there in the middle. You scored right in the middle of how everybody did in the country. And of course, if it said 90, then you are in the 90th percentile, and you scored better than all but 10% of the country. So again, this is important because it can help you to sort of figure out where your strengths and weaknesses are. And again, you might be wondering, okay, what percentile should I be aiming for? The answer is, if you look at that total MBE, so they do the total average of all the different scores that you did, and tell you for all of your questions, where did you fall? If you get to 33%, then that's where the cutoff of the 133 is going to be drawn for the MBE portion. So again, we're talking sort of the minimum for getting half of the test correct. So if you scored an average of 48 points on all of your essays, and your average position for all of the MBEs compared to everybody else in the country was in the 33 or higher, 34, 40, whatever, range, then you would get a 133 on the written test and a 133 on the MBE, and that would combine to the 266 that you're looking for. So again, looking at the subject matter breakdown in the MBE questions, you can see where you have particular weaknesses, and those are areas that you really want to focus on when you're studying. There is an extent to which studying in areas that you're strong at can also be helpful, because you have a context, you have a good sense of that particular area. So I don't want to, here we go. So I don't want to imply that you should not do any studying in the areas that you're already doing pretty well. That can be helpful, and you want to try to leverage everything that you have to get yourself over the hump there. But on the other hand, if you see a very strong contrast between different subject matter areas, so say you're scoring in the, say, 20th or 30th percentile in some areas, but more like the 10th percentile in another, then probably the most efficient use of your study time would be to get to know more about that weaker area to bring it up to the 30% range. And then a little bit of studying in the 30% areas might bring it up into the 35, 37% range, and then you're averaging that 33%. And again, we're talking averages, I just want to be clear. If you happen to be particularly strong in your essays and not as strong in your MBEs, making wholesale improvement across both areas might be a better strategy than trying to bring your MBE all the way up to where your essays are right now. Okay. So this is part of the planning, okay, planning what you're going to do to get better for the next administration of the bar exam. The first thing, this is the first step, figure out which subject matter areas seem to be weaker for you and identify those as possible areas of focus. Now, there are other things that you can do to help you prepare for the bar based on how you did in your last bar. I mentioned that I think it's very important that you review your actual essays, and you can order them from the New York State Board of Bar Examiners. There are instructions in your letter that you received. And I think if you have any questions, you can also go online and have those answered. And when you get those, first of all, you definitely want to review them yourself. And there's a few reasons for this. First of all, I find that people are often surprised when they review their essays, sometimes positively surprised and sometimes negatively surprised. And since you are trying to improve on how you actually did, not on how you thought you did, seeing these essays can give yourself a more realistic sense of where you really stand, okay? So you want to check, for example, that what you thought you end up writing is actually what you did write. And I mean this both big picture, because sometimes our memories play tricks and we think, oh, I spent a lot of time on this question talking about this thing, and you go back and you really only wrote a couple of sentences about it. It just seemed like you spent a lot of time on it, maybe because you were agonizing over it. And that really the bulk of the essay was about something else. But also, I want to say you should look at it in terms of the sort of micro level too. Often people feel like, oh, I talked about this, I explained this. And when you go back to look at it, especially when you've had a few months between the time you wrote it and the time you're reading it, you realize that you didn't actually make the connections you thought you made. And I want to assure you, this sometimes happens in reverse as well. Sometimes people feel like, oh, my essay was so incoherent, I can't believe I got any points at all. And you go back and look at it, and you say, you know what, actually this made a lot of sense. And again, you want to be working off developing where you really were, not where you think you are. So this is a reason why it's good to review the essays yourself. You want to get a good sense of how you actually performed. You also want to compare how you actually performed to how you wish you had performed. Okay? It might be that after you left the exam, you thought of all of these things that would have made sense, and you didn't get that into the essay. And so if you look at the essay now and you think, oh, I wish I talked about this, and I wish I talked about this, that's important because A, it probably means that that information was actually in your head somewhere, even at the time of the bar. And the issue is not learning the material, it's extracting the material. It's practicing pulling that material when you need it. And second of all, there's also an issue of sort of information management. Because sometimes what happens is people do think of these things in the moment, but because they're hastening to try to write an essay, they don't find an efficient way to sort of keep track of all the things they've done, maybe to prioritize which ones they want to write about first. And so if you find that there were things that you wish you had said, but you didn't actually say them, that might be a sign that you need to spend a little bit more time on the organization part of the essay, actually figuring out how to write what you're going to write. And then finally, you should look at all of the essays as a whole. Whoa. I need help from our technical advisor. We have an interesting sign up here. But I think you can all hear me, so I'm going to continue with my talking while he takes a look at this. Anyway, you want to take a look at all of your essays as a whole to see if there is a pattern to how they were, how you worked with them over time, okay? Your scores may reveal this. Many people have looked at the scores that have been reported to us in bulk, and sometimes I see a pretty consistent, 42, 45, 47, 45, right across the board. And then other times you see wild variations where, one essay is in the 30s, another essay is in the 50s. And sometimes it's probably just a matter of subject matter. That one particular question was just not in somebody's wheelhouse. But if I see a pattern that seems to be chronological, that, for example, they start off really strong, but the last couple of essays are low scoring, then to me that indicates there may actually be a time management issue. And even if it doesn't show up in the scores, when you review your essays, you may find that you spend a lot more time on the first essay than the last essay, for example. Or that your writing on the last essay feels really rushed compared to your writing in the first essay. And again, that may be reflected in the scores, or it may not be reflected in the scores. And either way, that's helpful. If it's reflected in the scores, that means, okay, you're not spending enough time on those last questions. Maybe you need to find a way to get through the earlier questions more quickly. But if it's not being reflected in the scores, if your first essays are getting about the same scores as your last essays, but you feel like, or it looks on the page like you're rushing through those last essays, maybe what that means, maybe what that means is that your first essays have a bunch of sort of padding and filler that they don't really need, that didn't add anything to your score. And so therefore, you can afford not to do some of those things that you're doing in the bulkier essays, because your less bulky essays are doing just fine. They're getting the same kind of scores. And therefore, you've got a little bit of extra time and attention to play with. So looking at sort of the big picture of all these essays can also be a way for you to learn about what you might want to focus on as when you're trying to get better. Okay. And then finally, my slide, there we go, making my slides visible. Finally, the next thing you might want to do is, as I said, ask someone else to review the questions. And I'm volunteering. It doesn't have to be me. It could be just another person you trust, a colleague, a mentor that you're working with. It's always good to get some feedback. But as I say, I'm happy to review your questions and let you know if I see any patterns or anything that's consistently missing or there that shouldn't be. And that can be very helpful as you start planning how to approach your next exam. And then finally, in terms of what you can learn from your last bar exam, you should go back and think about and replay in your head the final week before that exam, that last day of the exam. And the reason being, and the reason really for this meeting itself is, you want to be thinking way ahead about what you can be doing now and over the next 3.5 months to put yourself in a position where you know you've got a great shot at passing the bar. And that last week before your last bar is probably a place where some of the sort of stressful things were starting to show themselves. And now you have an opportunity to start here in November to try to avoid the things that maybe weren't working for you. And again, I don't want to make this entirely negative, to pay attention to the things that did work for you and say, I definitely want to make sure that that happens again in the future. So go back, think about especially that last week and the last day before the test, the day of the test, and ask yourself, okay, first of all, what would I have done differently? Sometimes this is really practical stuff, like, at what time did you arrive at the center for testing, okay? Some people showed up at the last minute, came running into the test all out of breath. It was not a great way to start the test. So now you know, okay, next time I'm going to get there an hour early, make sure I have a chance to sit down and maybe have a cup of tea or something. On the other hand, there might be some things that you thought worked for you, and you want to make sure that you repeat them. And it's good to consciously acknowledge these things and sort of make sure that they are in your list of things to do for your next exam. You also want to think about, as you were going into the test, how prepared did you feel, and why did you feel prepared or not prepared? And it's important to be thinking about this in the context of where you are now, because that feeling of preparedness is another thing that you want to get better at. Now, you might have gone into the test feeling like you were not entirely prepared. And so it might be that when you got your score and you hadn't passed, you were not totally surprised. And in that case, maybe that sense that you were not prepared is a pretty accurate one. And maybe that tells you that over the next few months, you should pay attention to that feeling more and sort of acknowledge that if you're not feeling comfortable, you're not feeling prepared, now is the time to put in that extra effort rather than letting it accumulate until then. On the other hand, there are also sometimes people who go into the exam feeling very comfortable and prepared, very confident that this is going to be a home run. You're going to make this, and you're going to be done. And very surprised when the results come back. And it's terribly disappointing, and I don't at all want anyone to feel bad if that's the situation they found themselves in. But again, this is an opportunity for you now to sort of assess, why was I feeling that confident? What did I not realize at that time that I want to make sure I've got covered this time? And so part of that you might be able to tell from looking at your scores. Maybe you didn't realize that you weren't as well versed in, say, civil procedure as you thought you were, okay? But again, examining that feeling of where you were at the time, comparing it to reality, and trying to use that to develop a better sense of how well prepared you are, can help you not just the day before the February exam, but starting now. And that's one of the things I really want to emphasize. You should be starting now, and you should be totally motivated that you're going to make the best use of this time. And part of making the best use of this time is sort of having a consistent awareness of where you are and what you need to be doing. And then finally, one last thing, very practical stuff. You should think about all of these practical things that sometimes affect our test performance, okay? Did they go well, or did they get in your way? Did you have trouble with exam stop? Did you find during the test that you couldn't keep track of your time because you didn't have a convenient way to look at the clock? These are all things that are completely manageable. Maybe they weren't manageable the last time around because they caught you by surprise, or because you thought, I have more important things to worry about than these things. But cumulatively, they can affect your performance. So now is a good time to sort of think about it and take whatever little steps might need to be taken to eliminate these things. Get them off your plate for the next exam. So these are all, in sum, a bunch of things that you can learn from the last exam that you took and apply them going forward to do better in the next exam. Now we're going to move on to the next thing, which is, now that you sort of have an idea about how things went, you want to think about how you want them to go in the future. You want to identify your targets and goals. And this is going to be personal to everyone, so I'm not going to try to be too specific here. But just to point out, you've got a whole bunch of different things to think about and from which you might want to choose in terms of your goals. Obviously, everyone's goal is for some kind of general improvement. And there's nothing wrong with that. As I said, if you just want to be a little bit better, especially if you are one of those people who's in that frustrating position of maybe just 5 points away from the cutoff score, I know, tremendously frustrating, but that's the kind of position where just doing a little bit better, being a little bit more efficient, knowing a little bit more about each subject matter area, will probably push you over the top. So that might be okay. But having analyzed your test scores, your essays, you might actually think, you know, there are some targeted areas in which I really need to learn this material. I thought I knew it, and I didn't, or I knew I didn't know it, but I didn't think it would be that important in the test. And so keep in mind, we've got 7 different subject matters in the MBE, basically 14 in the MEE. If there's an outline for each of those, which is available from the National Conference of Bar Examiners website. If you go to their section on the MBE, you'll find a link to the MBE subjects outline. It's got the 7 subjects and an outline that tells you what topics you need to know in each of those subjects. Which is great because it means there's some of the more obscure stuff, you know, I don't have to study that, it's outside of this outline. Similarly for the MEE, they have an outline. Technically the outline is divided into 12 parts, but 2 of those parts are subdivided. So trust and estates is divided into wills and trusts and estates. Wills and trusts and estates. The corporations and partnerships is divided up into 2 separate sections as well. So there's really 14 areas that you could be studying, and you should be aware of which ones you feel strong in and which ones you feel particularly weak in, and target those ones as well. Okay? You may find that one of your testing formats is perfectly fine. I mentioned the sort of cutoffs where you want to be. And if you have, for example, an MBE score that's already at 133, or you're already averaging over 48 on your MPTs, you might feel like, okay, maybe those aren't what I want to target. Maybe I'll focus more energy on the things that were weaker. Again, I don't advise that you ignore any of those subjects, because getting a bigger cushion by improving an area that you're already pretty good in is probably a pretty good idea. But attack these things proportionately. If you have a big weakness that seems to be causing you a bunch of points, you definitely want to aim for that. And then also, after you've done some review of your work, you might also be thinking, rather than sort of about the test itself, think about your own skills, what you're bringing to the test. Maybe what you really need to work on are some of the specific skills that go in. The important thing to do here is to actually identify what are my goals for the next 3.5 months, beyond just, I want to do better on the bar, okay? What goals do I think I can achieve in those 14 weeks or so that, 14 weeks, that's such a short period of time. It's probably more like 15 or 16 because of the months. Anyway, what can I achieve in that period of time that will get me to my overall goal of passing the bar? Okay? And don't just sort of look at this list and mentally say to yourself, oh, okay, analysis, I need to work on my analysis. I want you to write down, make a list, put a list, staple it to something important, or have it on the inside cover of your study notebook. Put it in some kind of position of prominence, because scientific studies have shown repeatedly that goals that you write down are much more likely to be achieved. Having that goal written down, and especially having it someplace where you will see it and it will remind you of what you're working toward, makes it much more likely, the order of 2 or 3 times more likely, that you will succeed in that goal than if you don't do that. But don't make these mental goals, make them physical goals that you can access, that you're reminded of, that motivate you all the way through till the end of February. Now, everyone's goal is going to be individualized, and that means that our next step, okay, what you would do is, how do I going to achieve these goals? I need to have a plan. So the next step is to develop a plan of attack. And again, this is going to be individualized as well. And this is another area in which I'm very happy to talk with people if they just want to, bat some ideas around, come up with a plan. It's not always easy to come up with a plan ourselves, especially if we are in a position where maybe we feel like we're limited by time or resources. We have other stresses on our mind. It may be hard to come up with alternatives that help you to achieve the goal you're aiming for. So you may be able to just sit down and write out a map, a plan of what you're going to do for the next 3.5 months. But if you think it would be helpful to talk to somebody else, please feel free to come and talk to me or to call me up on the phone. I appreciate being able to help people in this way. And oftentimes, people, when you talk to them, you point out something that, they don't see right away, but when you point it out to them, it's obvious, and they're like, yes, I can do it this way. So I want you to consider that as a possibility. But in general, when you're talking about developing a plan of attack, first of all, you want to start off with what you have. You don't want to be unrealistic. You want to make sure your goals are attainable. So appraise your resources and your constraints. How much time do you have? Some people are working full time and cannot do a bar attack the way they did right after they graduated from law school. Okay? Other people might have more time, but feel constrained in sort of their financial resources. A lot of the bar study help is expensive, and so you need to find ways to work around that if you're in that kind of position. Also, some people have other commitments, like family commitments, people with small children. That can be very draining, and you need to find a way to plan and work around that, especially in the long term, because a 3.5-month project can be very draining if you don't find ways to build in time and give yourself a recharge. So first of all, you've thought about, okay, what are my constraints? What do I have to work around? You should know then what your goals are, because you thought about them in the last step. And then what you want to do is be really explicit about mapping out a schedule for yourself for the entire time between now and February 26th, which is the first day of the February bar. Okay? Again, don't be non-specific. Okay? In the same way that just saying, oh, I want to pass the bar is not going to help you improve your bar skills as much as saying, oh, I want to improve my knowledge of civil procedure. I want to understand how to outline more quickly. Those kind of specific goals will help you to improve. Similarly, if you can spell out specifically, here are the hours that I have between now and February. Of course, it's unrealistic to expect you're going to know every single hour of every single day between now and then. Most of us have a pretty clear idea of our schedule based on maybe what our work hours are, what's expected of us from our family, and you can start filling in those areas that you know you're going to have time or you can make time. Count up the hours that you have between now and then. Figure out how you want to break those hours down in terms of taking time for testing, taking time for studying, going out and getting feedback. And then start putting in milestones that you want to achieve. So you may want to take, for example, practice tests. As I will explain here at the end, I'm going to offer a day-long practice test in December, early December, so that will give people an opportunity to sort of test themselves, see how they've done in the last month or so of preparation, and really assess what else they might want to do as they get into that real press after the holidays for preparing for the final exam, the bar exam, sorry. Mixing up my roles here at the law school between final exams and bar exams. So anyway, that if you want to participate in that, then that's about 4 weeks from now. You want to be thinking, okay, what do I want to accomplish in those 4 weeks? Do I have to study particular subject matter areas? Do I want to get a practice essay question in? Do I want to do more MBEs? Think about the milestones that you want to have achieved in between now and the bar exam, and then build the tasks that you want to do in between those things. When would you do practice tests? When would you study your subject matter material? Again, I'm not being very specific here because this is going to be wildly variant for different people. But the point is that you want to be as specific as you can when you're making your plan. Those of you who have taken commercial bar prep programs, first of all, if you've done this, or even if you've just considered it and you've looked at their schedules, you can see that their schedules are completely mapped out. From the beginning of the course to the end, they tell you exactly what you're going to do day by day. And that's not just because practically everybody needs to know where to go. It's because they need to have figured out how much time are they going to spend on each subject to make sure they can cover everything before everything is done. So now you're basically preparing to run your own personal bar prep program. And you need to do the same thing. You need to be as well prepared as that. The second thing I should mention, by the way, so some people will have taken the July 2018 bar exam as their first exam and have probably participated in a bar preparation program. For some of us, that's not the case. This may be your third or more time of taking the bar exam. And so I'm going to mention a little bit of difference in strategy. Those of you who have just taken their first bar exam and have just taken your first bar preparation course, you probably will be able to go back to your bar preparation course course and inform them that you did not pass the bar and you would like to take advantage of their guarantee. All the major bar companies basically guarantee that so long as you have done some basically practical housekeeping steps, you are able to repeat their course if you don't pass the first time. So if you're in that position, if the July bar exam was your first bar exam, you took a bar prep course, and now having not passed that time, you want to pass in February, definitely get back in touch with that course or your bar prep company and tell them that you want to take advantage of their offer to repeat the course. Now, you may or may not want to actually repeat the course step by step. It really depends on how much you took advantage of it the first time. If you are a person who just did everything that they gave you the first time, so that you covered all the subject matter material, you went to every lecture, you watched it online, you did all the practice stuff, you were like 90 to 100% accomplished in all the stuff you do, then it may not be that doing exactly the same thing again is the best way to prepare for a bar. Maybe we should talk about this, but I'm going to suggest that doing exactly the same thing may get you exactly the same result. If you've done all of that studying, maybe then what you want to do is to take advantage of the resources they would provide you and use that to do more targeted studying and preparation for the second go-around. On the other hand, if you didn't take full advantage of it the first time around, if you were distracted, if you had other things going on in your life, as people often do. When I was preparing for my bar exam, my wife was in her 9th month of pregnancy, and she gave birth 9 days before the bar exam. That was a tremendous distraction. I know sometimes people are moving or going to other places just before the bar exam, so all of these things can happen and maybe interfere with your full participation in the course the first time. If that's the case, then I would say on your second pass, you should make every effort to do everything that you can, everything that they offer. Because it may well be that the reason you didn't get over that hump was you just were missing some of the materials they were trying to get to. So what you do with that, if you're in that position, you really have to make an honest assessment about what would be the most effective thing. Now, if you're not in that position, if you didn't just complete a bar preparation course, and you don't have the luxury of going up to somebody and saying, okay, give me free materials, okay? Then what are you going to do? So that's where I come in here with identifying sources of study material. And I hope this will be helpful to people who either don't have the luxury of going back to a bar preparation company, or you could always, of course, pay for a bar preparation course. That's always an option, and I don't want to downplay that. In fact, some people recommend that if you've done one bar preparation course, and now you're in a different place, that a different one of a different type might be helpful too. So that's certainly something you could consider. You could consider going out there and paying for a bar preparation course. But if you're in a position where you have taken a bar preparation course, you've taken the bar once or twice, and you sort of have a sense of what to expect, and you're really in the place where I just need to get better at what I'm supposed to do on the bar, then it may be that what you need to do is have access to some of this material and then use it in a regular, methodical way. So I'm going to point out some of the source material so that you have that as an option as well. So again, I want to emphasize, I'm not telling anybody that this would be my first choice. If you had access to a formal bar preparation program, that might be great. But if you don't have access, if you can't afford it, if you don't have the time, because now you're working full time, so you couldn't go and do one of these intensive bar preparation courses, which would run basically from the day after Christmas until the day before the bar exam, then this kind of self-study is another viable option, but you always need to have some kind of source of material. And so let's go through some of the material you can have. First of all, you need to have subject matter material to study with, especially once you've identified those areas in which you are weak. And I will point out that those of you who have access to commercial bar prep materials, whether because you're going to be participating in a bar prep company or because it's something you've had from the past, those materials can still often be helpful. Obviously, if you've got something that's a year or two old, it's probably very reliable. If it's older, the older these materials get, the less reliable they get because law sometimes does change. Okay, but these can be helpful ways to get concentrated study in things that you know are going to be on the bar exam, because that's what they focus on. So of course they prepare outlines, they prepare subject-specific study aids that are sort of mixes of outlines and questions. There are flashcards. I have some of these materials in my office. Because I'm serving everybody in the school, I can't just let everybody take these from my office. But I'm always willing to let people come to my office, use them, scan things if you want to take pictures, or scan things so you can use them and practice on them later. Things like flashcards, I do let people sort of take them away for an hour or two to use the library or something like that. So I have some of these materials. You may have some materials already from whatever courses you've done recently or in the past. And there are markets for these online. You know, people sell these secondhand. So, and actually some of the bar prep companies also just sell these even outside of their course. I believe Kaplan offers some of these study materials that you can purchase separately from the course. I do not think they are inexpensive. So you may find that getting them from other sources. I don't believe our library has an extensive collection of this kind of stuff. Our library does have other things that might be helpful, which I'll talk about in a second. But again, the main reason why I'm even talking about these things, well, two reasons. One is that they probably will be convenient to some of you because you will have had this recently, but also because these focus on just the materials you can expect to be in the bar exam. The people who make these products go into the outlines, they look at past exams, they assess what kinds of questions are asked, and they focus right on that. On the other hand, there are other supplemental materials that focus on subject-specific material that come from other publishers, and we do have collections of those here in the UB Law Library. Okay, and I also have some of that in my office as well that you can come and look at. And I double check with our law librarian. You are all have access to the library. You can just go in and say, I'm going to run this as like a day pass, and you can go in and use our materials. So that's definitely a source of material as well. Of course, as I mentioned, you might have your own old notes and outlines, not just from bar study, but also from your classes. Okay, so don't underestimate those as well. And if at any point you're trying to study a particular subject matter area and you're just feeling kind of like, I'm having trouble finding stuff, please feel free to shoot me an email and I can track down some additional materials as well. Now, all of this is getting yourself prepared to do actual practice. And I hope people get to do lots of practice between now and February, because practice is how you get better, practice is how you assess where you are. And so this practice material is very important. And it's not actually that hard to find practice material that you can use. So let's talk about the three different kinds of practice material. First of all, essay questions. If you go to the National Conference of Bar Examiners site, first of all, they posted 10 sets of questions from the administrations of the bar between 2009 and 2013, February and June each year. So you can get both the MEEP and the NPT questions from those years, and they're just for free. They just posted them on their website. So that's there, and you can look at them. Those are a little bit older, but still probably pretty good to work with. The New York Board of Law Examiners also posts all of their past essay questions, the MEE type questions, with sample answers. I think I alluded to this earlier. And you can just find that at the New York State Board of Law Examiners. Again, I will make sure these slides are available so you can get these links from the slides as well. The thing to know about the New York Board of Law Examiners is they've got everything up for like the past 16 years. But remember that New York changed over to the Uniform Bar Exam in 2016. So all the essays before July of 2016 are New York essays, and they focus much more on New York specific law than the UPE did. So they're not going to be representative of what you would see. And I would not recommend doing a lot of practice on the essay questions from New York before July 2016. But they do have July and February 2016, 2017, 2018, and of course they have sample answers that are the samples of what the New York graders were looking for, so that can be very helpful. Also, you can purchase the most recent sets of administrations from the National Conference of Bar Examiners. They're not terribly expensive. Those are the most recent ones. And of course, those give you additional questions you can practice with. But one thing that's great about the internet is that there are so many other places that you can find. So if you just do a quick Google search, you can find that there are other states like Arkansas and Minnesota that have been administering the UPE for longer than New York has, and therefore their bar sites have posted the questions and answers from the back end as well. And you can download those for free. Now, obviously, their answers are going to be what the Arkansas and Minnesota people were looking for. But if you're just looking for practice questions to practice on, these are good sources that you can access, and you don't have to pay. Similarly, your NPT questions, same kind of deal. The thing about the NPT questions is New York does not publish the questions themselves. They publish their sample answers, but they only publish a summary of what the question was about. So you can get practice questions on your NPTs from the New York website. But again, there are 10 administrations, and remember there are 2 NPT questions at every administration. So that's 20 NPT questions you can download for free from the NCBE site. And really, if you did just one practice NPT question every 2 weeks or so between now and the bar exam, that's still only going to be 7 or 8 questions, which is more than they have on the site, 20 on the site. So just from going to the the National Conference of Bar Examiners site, you should be able to access plenty of free NPTs to do even twice a week, or not twice a week, once every week between now and the bar for practice. So you shouldn't have any trouble finding those. The real question is where to find the MBE questions. The reason that the MBE questions are so easy to find is that the National Conference of Bar Examiners is not so stingy about them and allows the states to publish them on their websites. But they're very close-fisted about the MBE questions. They don't want to let a lot of them out in public. So what you should know is there is a difference between actual MBE questions and simulated MBE questions. There's actually only a limited number of actual used on the test MBE questions that are out there. And as we'll talk about in a minute, not all of them are particularly useful. And because of that, a lot of people and authors and companies have created simulated MBE questions. And they've created questions that are meant to be like MBE questions to help you practice, because there just aren't that many actual ones that are out there. So you should keep that in mind when you're studying. If you can save your actual MBE questions for closer to the exam, then you can be assured that the things that you're working with last are probably closest to the things you're going to see. Okay? And if you're practicing with simulated questions, just keep in mind, this may be helpful in practicing things like, close reading, quickly processing, spotting issues, but they're not going to be exact duplicates of what you can expect on the test. Also, as I said, there are a limited number of MBE questions out there, but most of the ones that have been released were actually produced before the year 2000. You can find them, and I'm going to show you where you can find them. You can find them for free, those older questions on the NCBE site. But even the National Conference of Bar Examiners has a warning, a disclaimer, that says we are making these questions available because they're out there in the world. Other commercial providers have them. We're making them available. But we do not recommend that you use these to study for the bar exam, because the bar has changed so much. The law has changed, particularly in certain areas like constitutional law and criminal procedure. And the way people are instructed to write their questions has changed too. So these older questions are maybe helpful for learning some of the basic skills like close reading, critical reading, time management, being able to select between one answer and another answer, but they're not going to help you specifically prepare for the current MBE. So always keep these in mind when you're trying to do practice questions. Keep in mind these three things. There's a limited number of actual MBE questions that are useful to you, that have been made in the last decade or so, that are available. Only about 500 or 600. There are probably another 1,200 that are old questions that are sort of representative of the old way they get gave, but not so useful now. And then there are thousands and thousands of simulated questions that are produced elsewhere. But I recommended recently, and I know you've heard from Dean Saran, that you should spend about 25, or you should try to do about 25 MBE questions every day. And if you think about it, if you did 25 MBE questions every day, if you had a universe of 1,600 or so, that would be about 64 days, okay? So you probably need another 1,000 simulated questions to make up the difference for study between now and the bar exam. But there's plenty of material out there. And by the way, since the National Conference of Bar Examiners has only released a specific set of these bar questions that they've actually used, that means that every company that says that they use actual bar questions is actually using the same actual bar questions. So you won't get additional bar questions if you go to different companies. So I'm gonna flip the camera on for a second. Not because I'm thinking, but because I want to show you something. Okay, so here, just so you can see me, I want to point out, you can get some of these questions here in this series. It's a Manual series, Strategies and Tactics for the MBE. This contains a bunch of actual questions that were used in the MBE. It's like 160 questions for each of the 7 topics, except the constitutional law questions, not constitutional law, the civil procedure questions, because civil procedure is so new, they don't have as many actual questions to put in here. They have to put some simulated questions. This other volume that looks very similar, only instead of Studies and Tactics for the MBE, it's for the FINS method. Very similar in that it's divided up into different categories, but these ones are simulated questions. Okay, so you could use these 2 books to study from, and you wouldn't run into any repeat questions. So these are one set of sources, and I believe these books are like $60 or $70. So that is perhaps cheaper than signing up for a bar prep enhancement course. So that's one way that you can get information. I'm going to go back to the slideshow. That's one way that you can get these questions to work with. I'm back. Okay. All right, so that's one way to get these questions to work with. As I said, the NCBE has released a bunch of questions. Many of these questions are used by commercial bar prep places. They also sell them themselves, okay? So you have a few sample questions on the NCBE site. You have 4 100-question practice exams that are available for $50 a piece at the NCBE store. Then they have one big study aid that has about 210 questions. They don't have to hear, but you'd find it at the same place. And it also has additional questions, different questions. And then finally, these links here will take you to the free questions they gave away, because these questions are from 1992 and earlier. So again, they're not very reliable in terms of actually preparing for the bar, what you could expect to see in the bar. though they might be good at the beginning of practice for sort of loosening up, remembering your subject matter, getting used to your close reading and things like that. So those are sources for the questions that the NCDE has released, and those are the kinds of questions that are picked up by other providers. And then if you're looking for simulated practice questions, I've listed a bunch here. I don't think I need to go through one by one. But just to point out, sometimes bar prep courses have their own simulating questions. If you've got those books yourself, you can use those. You can order at least some of these books. I know Kaplan has a book you can purchase from their site. There are a few websites that offer free questions as a kind of teaser to bring you on board. So you can go ahead and use these websites to get questions. Bar Prep Hero and Quimby. Between the two of them, I said 60, that's a mistake there. It says it offers 60 50 question tests. That should just be 6. I think that on the slides. But that's 500 questions that you can get free from Bar Prep Hero, and almost 200 questions that you can get free from Quimby. Again, quality of these questions are probably not the same as the quality on the actual MBE questions, which is again why you might want to use these as a warm-up and save the actual questions as you get closer to the bar exam. But again, to do this consistently, you want to have access to lots of questions to work with. If at any point you feel like you're running out of practice materials, whether it's for essays or multiple choice questions, please feel free to contact me and we can sort of brainstorm about where else you might want to find stuff. And then finally, now you've got a plan, you know where to find resources so that you can do all this study. And this is where you just want to get into the actual work, which is a cycle of study and practice and feedback. I suggest that you start, as I've said before, and I think you've heard from the instrument, start off by doing practice MBE questions. This is partly because it's easy to just jump right into them. They don't necessarily have to take up a big chunk of time and attention. You could do 5 questions in the morning and 5 at your lunch hour and 15 questions in the evening. But what you want to do is after you do the questions, check out the answers, find out which ones you got wrong and why. And the ones that you got wrong and why, if you got them wrong or if you got them right but for the wrong reason, go ahead and force yourself to write out a paragraph in IRAC format that explains how do you arrive at the proper answer. Now you'll probably know this from reading the answer. You'll have a clear idea. So what's the purpose of this? It's not to figure out the answer. It's to internalize how do you note the details that are important. How do you apply the rule that matters to the facts? How do you articulate the rule that matters? Because often these MBE questions turn on very particular rules and exceptions. So all of those things are ways that you can improve your MBE performance by reviewing your past MBE questions. And MBE questions is just a good way to sort of warm up and start doing your work, learning the subject matter, refreshing yourself on these things. It's an easy way in. But for the most part, you want to try to do practice as well. Before you do practice, you want to study. You want to learn in the areas that are weaker for you before you start grilling yourself in these areas. So go ahead and get the study materials, refresh yourself on the areas that maybe you studied a long time ago before you jump into doing the practice questions, because then you're just wasting the practice questions if you do them and you haven't done the study first. Try to do MPTs with some regularity, but since you don't need to study for those are easier to schedule. Okay, just kind of depending on how well you did. If you didn't do very well at all on your MPTs, and again, that's something I can help you with. But if you didn't do very well at all, you might want to do more practice every week or so, rather than say every 2 or 3 weeks. But just try to do them regularly to get better and better at them over time. And for everything that you write, do try to get some feedback. Okay? It doesn't necessarily mean every single piece of paper you write you need to show to somebody, but you should aim to have a proportion. 1 out of every 3 essays you write, or something like that, that you send to somebody or you ask someone to take a look at. So you're getting continuous feedback as you are studying over time. And again, you're aiming for your goals. There are things that you want to improve in. And so this is how you achieve those goals. You break it down to what are my specific goals and what are the tools I have to use to get there. And then you measure your progress along the way. And again, I am here to help you not just get these materials and work out a plan, but to help you measure your progress and help you get over any humps if need be. So this went a little bit longer than planned, in part because there were little impromptu interruptions. But before I sign off, I want to do as I promised. I'm going to get out of the slides and go back to the chat and give anybody who has a question or would like to ask a question a chance to do so. So you can either type in a question, or you can speak if you've got a microphone. I think I've enabled people with microphones. So I'm going to give everybody a chance now to ask a question either orally or by typing. Are there any questions or concerns? Oh, here's a question. Do I know anything about the Merino Bar Prep Company? I heard it was good for retakers. If you don't know, that's okay. I have not worked with them personally. I, too, have heard a little bit about them, and I haven't heard anything bad. But I don't have any first-hand knowledge. I do, however, belong to a network of academic support specialists. So what I will do is I will throw this question out to them for feedback. And because I don't think I've actually seen people ask specifically about this one. And I will ask if there's anybody there who's worked with the Merino company, and especially with respect to retakers, and try to get some feedback and pass that along to you. So hopefully that will be helpful. And again, because I'm in this network, if you have any of those kinds of questions, have people heard about particular bar companies or particular techniques, I can always, if I don't know something, I can always get more information. Any other questions? Anything else people are wondering about? Okay. Sounds like no. So the last thing I want to put up here, the very last slide. Oh wait, here's something. Hold on. Sorry if I missed it. Is there a set date for the practice exam? Ah, very good. That is in fact what I am about to share. So let me share this here. So the practice exam, this is the last slide, the details here. Again, this will be posted so you'll be able to see it. The practice exam will be held on December 8th, so that's a Saturday, so that even people who are busy during the work week will be able to attend. You can expect it to take 3 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon. We will be here in O'Brien Hall. I have not yet fixed a location in O'Brien, but I will get that out to everybody. And it will basically be like half of a bar exam. Okay, so in the morning, we will undertake 3 MPE type essays and 1 MPT essay. In the afternoon, we will go through 100 MPE questions. And really the purpose here, partly I wanted to give a milestone for people to be working toward at the beginning, especially a milestone that's not terribly stressful. If you're participating in like a preparation program and you're doing a practice test a week or 2 before the bar exam, that can feel kind of make or break it. This is really meant to be something that motivates you to start practicing now and gives you a chance to sort of see how you did and where you are. But you know, if it reveals that you've got some holes, you still have plenty of time to work on those things. So that's the plan. Also, if you now, especially those of you who took the bar for the first time in July, have maybe some thoughts about how you might do things differently, this does give you an opportunity, especially with respect to, say, the essay questions, to experiment a little with how you approach your time management, your outlining before the bar, before the writing the question out. and how you organize and actually write the tests. So there you go. That is the schedule. Again, when I post these slides, you'll have access to this again. I'm going to stop sharing this. Okay, another question. Must we use only IRAC, or can we also use CRAC, I guess, to answer essay questions? That's actually a very smart question. So the question is, should we only use IRAC, or can we use CRAC, which is when you start with the conclusion rather than the issue, and then rule, issue, and conclusion again. What I like to suggest is that it's always nice to think about whether you could start with a conclusion, okay? Starting with a conclusion can be very helpful because you're telling the reader right there, here's the answer I'm going to work for. And it can also be helpful to you because if you are able to come up with the conclusion before you begin to write, then you can be more confident about the analysis that you're going to give because you must have gone through the analysis to reach the conclusion. So when you can use the CRAC format, the conclusion, rule, analysis, conclusion format, that can be a good thing. However, you should never feel forced to use that analysis. You should not feel like I've got to write it in the CRAC format. And the reason for this is under the time pressure of the essay format and the NPT for that. Under that time pressure, sometimes you just have to figure some things out on the fly. And if you're not quite sure what the answer is going to be and you're trying to work it out, you figured out what the issue is and you know what the rule should be and you want to apply it to these facts, if you commit yourself to a conclusion before you really know what the answer is going to be, that can have a subtle influence on the way you do your analysis. You basically talk yourself into, I have to end up with this conclusion. And it may not be the right conclusion. It may not be the best conclusion to work with. So what I recommend is if you see an opportunity to write using the CRAC format, to give that conclusion up front, then go ahead and take it. It shows a certain amount of confidence. It can be a guide to the reader. But if you don't, if you have any sort of doubt about your answer or you're still working on it in your head, then don't force the CRAC format. Stay with the IRAC. It's a good way to walk yourself through the analysis. So thank you for that question. Another question I just received, how will we receive feedback from our practice exams? I purposely scheduled the practice exam at a time where I know I won't be giving feedback to the folks that are here first year, so that I will have time to go through your practice exams and give you my commentary. And then what I will do is scan that and send it back to you via email. If you have a different method that you prefer, if you'd rather get the hard copy, come to visit or something, let me know. But unless I get other instructions, what I'll ask everybody to do is to give me their preferred email, and I will email you scanned copies of your commented upon practice exams that way. I hope that answers your question. Any other questions? Okay. Well, very good. Thank you, everybody, for participating. Again, I apologize for the glitch and for the fact that it seems to led us to be a little bit over time. Will we receive scores quicker this time? Yes, I've gotten better at planning when to have people submit things to me so that I'm not doing everything at one time. Yes, you should be able to get your scores quicker this time. Thank you all very much. Again, you have all of you have my contact information. You can reach me by telephone or by email from the information at the bottom of my email messages to you. So please feel free to do so if you run into any problems or you just want to brainstorm about your plan. And otherwise, I will stay in touch. Vincent says, I meant the New York bar examiners. I understand, yes, I thought that, you're not going to get your feedback in 5 months like the New York Board of Bar examiners. But yes, I meant to assure you that. Since we're doing this in early December, I intend to get this all turned around before Christmas so you can actually do something for this before you have to go. I'm going to answer one more question, and then in the interest of not keeping everybody here, if anybody has any additional questions later, please feel free to send me an email or telephone me. The last question here is, what did you start with CRAC and later realize you can't really corroborate it? Can you give a counter argument to clarify or balance your answer? What I would suggest, first of all, it depends a little bit on whether you're writing by hand or by computer. If you're writing by computer, remember that it's easier to just cut and paste and move things around or to insert some information ahead of it. So if you start with a CRAC and you realize like, oh, this is actually the weaker argument, what I would do then is rather than just starting the counter argument there, I would go back up, treat that CRAC that you had just written as the counter argument and give the stronger argument first. You can insert that in there. If you're writing by hand, that becomes a little bit messier. You can still do that, but you have to sort of keep track of things. And bar examiners who are reading handwritten things are very patient, but you can't be guaranteed they're going to be patient for every little thing that you do. So you do have to be careful about how you present that. But I think the way you want to think about your writing, and this is one of the things I recommend practicing, is that, as you are writing, remember that you can go back and move things around, especially on the computer. And so therefore, you think of it as kind of a fluid document. That will give you a little bit more freedom to make those kinds of mistakes. I hope that answers your question. And again, if you have additional questions, please get in touch with me. And in fact, I hope that we remain in touch over the next few months because I would like to be as supportive as possible. And I think this wraps it all up. Thank you all very much.